Welcome to On the Brink. This is Ria from Castle Island. In this episode, I was joined by Jamil and Nick, the co founders of Gamma, an inscription service and newly launched marketplace for ordinals. Jamil and Nick tell me about lowering the barrier to inscribing ordinals, their considerations in designing a marketplace that's purpose built for and upholds the ethos and culture around ordinals, and much more. So let's turn it to our conversation. Hey everyone, this is Ria. Welcome back to another episode of On the Brink. Today I have Nick and Jamil from Gamma to talk to us about ordinals, inscribing on Bitcoin, as well as trading on Bitcoin via their new ordinals marketplace. But before we get into all of that, Nick and Jamil, could you start off by giving us a quick introduction? Tell us a little bit about yourselves. What were you doing pre-Gamma, pre-Stacks NFT? How did you guys meet and end up deciding to work on this project together?
Yeah, thanks so much, Ria, for having us on. Yeah, it's been a eventful 18 months working on Gamma. We started off basically with this idea that in around mid 2021, we saw all the activity that was happening in the NFT marketplaces and in the digital asset space, and we noticed that although there was a lot of activity on chains like Ethereum and Solana and others, there was a relative lack of attention on Bitcoin. And this was really interesting to us because we saw Bitcoin as the best store of value for your fungible assets. Institutions all over the world, people all over the world trust Bitcoin as their store of value. And yet there was barely any attention being put on Bitcoin as a source for NFTs or as a source for digital assets. So we basically spent the past 18 months focusing on trying to make that dream of Bitcoin digital assets come true. First, through creator tools and making it more accessible for people to create NFTs and create assets on Bitcoin, and then eventually launching a marketplace. And we did all of this on the Bitcoin L2 stacks. Uh, Over the past month or so, it's been incredible to see all of the traction and opportunity around digital assets on Bitcoin on L1 through ordinals. And we've basically just been focusing on building infrastructure and building tools and building ways for creators to get started on Bitcoin as quickly and easily as possible. So you can right now drag and drop images or text on your computer and instantly inscribe it directly onto Bitcoin. And by the time this podcast goes out, we'll have also launched a marketplace where you can actually trade these inscriptions with others and list them for sale. It'll be the first one to do it in a truly trustless way. So we're super excited about that. Briefly, before starting at Gamma, I was mostly in the traditional tech world, focusing a lot on AI ML. But as is a pretty common story in tech, crypto was always my side projects and hobbies, and it was a similar story for Nick, which is actually how we met. I can pass it along to him.
I'm really more on on the ops side of things. So most recently, in digital marketing, so paid media and SEO, and I also kind of found my way to this programmable Bitcoin ecosystem that I like to kind of call it, and that was initially through Stacks, Bitcoin L2, and I was just kind of found my way to this amazing community of people who were aligned with this vision of Bitcoin doing more than just being a store of value. And I think that there's tends to be this perception that there's this huge Bitcoin maximalist community that wants Bitcoin to do absolutely nothing. But I think what we found is that this is really a loud minority. And I think that most people want to see digital assets, including Bitcoin itself, to be doing more than just being like digital gold and nothing else. And I think that, finding this ecosystem of people, and of course there's Bitcoin builders elsewhere as well, but uh, this kind of gave me a little bit of inspiration to start an NFT project of my own, which was, combining just some of my creative outlets and a little bit of story building and things like that. And I had this idea, but I didn't know how to actually go about creating the smart contract. Like, I'm relatively technical, but not a developer, and so I actually found Jamil quite early on in his days of what was originally called STX NFT, which is now Gamma, and he was building creator tools and helping creators launch smart contracts. And so, he helped me get my contract up and running. I was one of the first several collections that launched on the STX NFT marketplace. And then pretty soon thereafter, I mentioned I come from digital marketing, and this early website, kind of like MVP, was very capable, like feature wise, but it was quite basic. And so I offered some assistance in terms of creating content and certain CRO kinds of things. And Jamil was super receptive to that, and then, very quickly thereafter, I think we just realized that there'd be some synergies, working together, and some complementary skills. So yeah, the rest is history. I think it was probably about a month or two later that we both around the same time left our full-time jobs and went all in on Web3 and all in on Gamma, and it's been a total blast ever since.
It's been really impressive to see how quickly you guys kind of hopped on the Ordinals bandwagon, and how quickly you shipped features, and how quickly you kind of just emerged as the premier platform for inscribing NFTs on Bitcoin. Before we get into that, and get into kind of maybe understanding your aha moment around ordinals, could you guys just level set, for the audience? We've done a couple episodes on ordinals on Bitcoin, but maybe for audience members, listeners who haven't heard those episodes, just talk a little bit about what are inscriptions versus ordinals, and how is it possible for us to have NFTs on Bitcoin. Maybe Jamil, will start with you.
So I think what makes this so interesting and so exciting is there's really two parts to this. Right? Before, Bitcoin was basically just treated like any sort of fungible currency. And what that means is, like, one BTC is kind of indistinguishable from another. Like, just when you pay for your coffee with your debit card or your credit card, you don't really care which $5 or $3 or whatever it takes it out from. It's just $3 off your balance. And people sort of saw Bitcoin quite the same way. With ordinals, what it does is it actually assigns a unique value to every single unit of Bitcoin that's out there. And so what that allows you to do is to treat each BTC, each unit of BTC, each Satoshi differently from the other. So you can actually do a lot with this. Actually, you can trace back the history of all your Bitcoin in your wallet, right back to the block that it was mined. So, for example, you might have some BTC in your wallet that was mined all the way back in 2009 by Satoshi or something. Or you can have BTC that was mined just in the last block, and you can actually trace back the history of your wallet and see where all your BTC actually came from. The second part is the inscriptions part, and that's what allows you to put the data, your images, your text, your books, directly on the Bitcoin blockchain and associate it with one of those Satoshis or one of those units of Bitcoin. So what this allows you to do is not only have a wallet where you can trace back the history of each one of those sats and of all your Bitcoin, but actually a way to hold sats that contain data or that reference data that's actually put directly on the blockchain. And I think this is what makes ordinals and inscriptions so unique. You found a way to basically put data that you care about, or data that you find valuable, or assets that you find valuable directly on the longest running, most secure, most decentralized blockchain. And I think that's what's really magical about this opportunity. Never before have we seen a chance to basically put these valuable assets directly on what we see as the most valuable blockchain out there.
That explanation kind of laid out why a creator might want to create an inscription on Bitcoin versus another chain. And, we can maybe talk a little bit later about the similarities and differences of inscribing on Bitcoin versus an Ethereum or something like that. But what, in your experience, kind of operating this initial inscription service and working on the marketplace, have you seen as like the key reasons why individual creators or entities that are dropping individual NFTs or collections on Bitcoin, what's kind of attracting them to this opportunity?
Yeah, I'll let Nick expand on this a little bit too, because I know he has a lot of thoughts on the creator side of things. But I'll mention one thing that we found really interesting when we first launched our inscription service. When we launched, we had really no idea what to expect or what we'd see from users in terms of how they'd use our inscription service. One of the most fascinating things that we saw was people actually starting to use our inscription service in a way that doesn't really match up with how you use ETH creator tools. They were inscribing books, they were inscribing poems, they were inscribing personal photos. They were inscribing things that you could tell they wanted it to last the test of time. They weren't just doing it to speculate on, prices going up or trying to speculate on the value of an asset. They were doing it because they wanted to preserve that information and because they trusted Bitcoin as basically that long-term store of value, store of information, store of basically their non-fungible assets. And I think this kind of gets the root of why people why people find ordinals so unique. It's the way that they trust the way in which they trust their assets to be stored. And so we followed up with that, and we saw even artists saying, I was looking for years for a place to basically put this artwork. I didn't really feel comfortable putting it in an NFT on ETH or on any other chain, and this really feels right. This is what deserves to hold my work, to hold it as an asset, to trade it in the future, so that I can be sure that it gets the respect that it deserves, both on chain and on this most decentralized blockchain.
I think you kind of summed it up to the key points. I think maybe just to expand a little bit, I kind of in thinking about this, I think you kind of have these first few components of like really what is unique about ordinals and inscriptions. And so like I think you have a Satoshi, which is basically kind of like the equivalent of like a cent to a dollar for Bitcoin. And so you have this like digital cent, and now you have a way to track it, as Jamil was explaining, and now you have a way to associate stuff with that. And it's like those first three things are really like the technical unlocks. It's like you have a small unit, it's trackable, you can inscribe stuff with it. But that is not actually what is valuable. Like the thing that makes it valuable is a very kind of, in some ways, seemingly basic concept, which is just that once you do that, you have the cent, you track it, and you associate stuff to it. The single differentiator that Bitcoin provides that really adds value here is that it will just never change, ever. And like that is what it makes it valuable. And I think like to kind of drill down a little bit, it's like, if you are, a creator and you are putting your blood, sweat, and tears into this creation, you want to know that this work is going to live on. You want to know that it's going to live on, perhaps beyond you as a creator, perhaps beyond, all of us right now. And I think that what's kind of like, an interesting almost thought experiment here is that, Bitcoin might not be here forever. I certainly am bullish on Bitcoin's, long-term potential. But even if it's not here forever, it has a better chance at being here longer than anything else because it's spread out across 20,000 machines, probably even more as a result of ordinals, all across the world in all different means, by institutions, people, smaller businesses and mining rigs, and basically every different type of person or individual or entity can be running one of these nodes. And so I think that's really like the key unlock here, and that's why you see people willing to spend um, meaningful amounts of money to inscribe data directly onto the blockchain. Like, it wouldn't be worth paying that if you didn't think that settlement was valuable. And then I'd say, just as a final mention, from a collector side, or from someone who's purchasing one of these inscriptions on a marketplace, for example, it's equally as important. Just from the flip side, if I purchase this, it's a digital asset. It's not a given that digital asset will always exist forever. And so if I'm investing maybe a significant amount of money to purchase something that I view as unique and as a digital asset, I want to know that it's going to continue on. And so I could go on about this, but I think like that's really the key difference, and that's what Bitcoin uniquely provides.
As a collector and aspiring creator of NFTs, I definitely see that as one of the core value propositions. Nick, you mentioned something that I think is a good segue into talking about the inscription service that you guys kind of started off with. But you said, as a result of ordinals, the number of nodes kind of validating the network has potentially grown. So, talk about the inscription service and the experience for creators inscribing an ordinal NFT pre and post Gamma.
Yeah, so I do want to like preface this by saying, um, I think the goal long term is to try to have as many people like set up a proper Bitcoin node for themselves and kind of fulfill that promise of complete sovereignty and controlling your own destiny, so to speak, with respect to Bitcoin. But I think the reality is that the average person is not going to go from having no exposure to Bitcoin or having very minimal exposure to Bitcoin to now, just spinning up a machine to run a node and make sure that it's set up in a reliable way, or maybe use a cloud-based service and pay a couple $100 a month to keep this running. So it's like there's a lot involved with running a Bitcoin full node. Not to mention specialized software on top so that you can operate with ordinals. So I think that we saw what was a pretty clear need to make this much more accessible to the average person who just wants to kind of get their feet wet and experience this for the first time. And so basically what the inscription service does is it takes all of the complicated steps in the process, and we handle all of those, and it basically takes a process down. I think we saw somebody tweeted about how they had set up a node, and I think it took them a couple of days to get the node set up and synced and configured properly with the ordinal software. And then, a week later, Gamma was launched with the inscription service, and then they were actually able to record a screen recording in 38 seconds, actually creating an inscription. And what that means is basically they are providing some text that they want to inscribe, or maybe they're uploading an image, and then we basically give somebody just a Bitcoin address, and all you have to do is send the amount of Bitcoin to that address that it costs for your inscription, and then we handle all the rest. So we'll handle getting the node synced, getting all that set up. we'll inscribe it for you, and then we'll transfer that to you. And what's kind of nice about this is, if we really go to like the hardcore, like philosophical side of trustlessness, there is a very small amount of trust in this process in sending us Bitcoin and trusting us to inscribe your actual your inscription. But that's basically where the trust ends, because as soon as we send you your inscription, as Jamil mentioned before, it's just a Satoshi, which is Bitcoin. And so as soon as you have Bitcoin, you have possession over that Bitcoin. It's yours forever, and Gamma has no ties to it. So I think it's kind of this really great opportunity to lower the barriers to entering, and provide a really great experience for creators.
I think I came across Gamma quite a few weeks ago at this point, and you have, you know, added a number of different features and functions to make it even more useful for creators and collectors. Can you just talk a little bit about, for listeners, how the product has evolved from when you first launched it to where it is now, and how maybe easy or difficult it was to get from there to where you are now?
I think the main thing that we wanted to get done at first was to provide an easy way to go from a file on your computer, an image or some text, to an inscription that you have on the Bitcoin blockchain. And that was the first product that we launched. That basically took the time down, as Nick said, from like 3 days to 30 seconds in terms of getting that functionality available. But creators generally want to do a lot more, right? They don't want to just inscribe their own work. They want to be able to let other people mint their work or provide stuff for sale that other people can mint, sort of like on Ethereum or on other blockchains. So we quickly realized that there was a need to provide something like this, because the way that people were doing this right now was they would be inscribing some work, and then they would be setting up a Google Sheets or like some manual Discord system that would then try and allocate which inscriptions go to which collectors, and doing over the counter trades. And so the second thing that we launched was a way to do collection mints. And in this way, the creator can just upload a bunch of images. They don't have to pay directly to get them inscribed at first. And they just share a link to their users. And basically what happens is that their collectors can now mint or inscribe those inscriptions, with some fee going to the collector, some fee going to the miner to pay. But the key point is that the creator doesn't pay anything upfront. Their collectors can mint their work, the creator gets paid, the collectors get their inscriptions, and it's a really seamless sort of Ethereum style or a process that is people are used to on other chains, instead of sort of the creator paying for all the inscriptions and then having to distribute them. So we really tried to make it as easy as possible for a creator to go from a collection to just getting their work out there into the world. And I think a natural corollary of this is then allowing for secondary sales, which is where the marketplace comes in, which is what we're announcing now. And that'll allow people to continue that life cycle. Say, now, once I've minted something, once I've inscribed something, how can I now trade it with other people? How can I now, buy an artist's work after the mint is closed, and continue on that process?
That's a good segue to talk about the reason we're all here today, which is the Ordinals marketplace that you're announcing and launching. And Jamil, you alluded to this just now, but maybe talk about, in maybe a little bit more detail, logistically, how most collectors have been trading Ordinals today, and maybe how roundabout of a process or antiquated of a process it has been to date.
Yeah, I think the majority of the trading that we've seen on ordinals has been basically over the counter. DGods had a successful mint just a few days ago, where they basically minted out some DGods at, I think, 0.33 BTC, so quite a substantial amount. And almost all of the trading that's going on, they have a DGods trading desk that's basically an Airtable or spreadsheet of bids and asks. So it's really, really manual, because there isn't a great marketplace solution up until Gamma that provides you a trustless way and an easy way to trade inscriptions with each other. So a lot of the trading that's been happening has been very manual, very over-the-counter, requires trusted third parties who charge high fees to escrow trades. And what we're really aiming for, and I think what we've delivered, is this OpenSea plus MetaMask style experience where you just go to Gamma, you click on the collection you want to browse, you can buy any for sale, you just sign a transaction, and it appears in your wallet when the next block confirms. And likewise with listing. Just like on other marketplaces, when you create a listing, it's completely gasless, no transaction fees. You just sign a listing and anybody can buy it. And crucially, this requires no trust on the marketplace side. We don't take your private keys. We never custody any assets. It's a completely decentralized process of basically trading these things where any seller can list their inscription and any buyer can fulfill that order without us sort of mediating it in the middle. And I think that's really doing things in the spirit of Bitcoin as well. You know, we're building this future financial system and this future paradigm of trustlessness, to get away from a lot of these, corrupt institutions or trusted ways of doing things before. And I think we're delivering very much in line with that ethos.
You've clearly been very fast to market. And usually when you're fast to market, you kind of launch a minimum viable product that maybe has trade-offs around permissionlessness, trustlessness. But to see you guys launch a suite of products that kind of minimizes trust while also being so fast to market, that has been really, really impressive to see. When it comes to actually facilitating this trustless trading and inscribing of assets on Bitcoin, can you talk a little bit maybe around the technical aspect of how you're actually facilitating that?
Yeah, for sure. So on Bitcoin, you can actually create what's called a partially signed Bitcoin transaction. And what this allows you to do is actually very simply say something like, I have this inscription, it lives at this transaction output, and I'm only willing to transfer it to someone if they can provide me with, say, 1 BTC, if that's the listing price. And so you basically create this incomplete transaction that says, I'm willing to transfer this NFT, this inscription, if you're willing to give me 1 BTC. And any buyer can basically take that partially signed transaction and just fill in the rest of the inputs. So the buyer will say, okay, here's the 1 BTC that I have, and in return, I'll take that inscription from you. And so what this allows the seller to do is basically specify those set of conditions under which they would like that transaction output to be spent. Now, crucially as well, what we're doing at Gamma on the marketplace is we waited a little bit to actually have the infrastructure for web wallets to also allow you to sign these transactions and to interact with the marketplace in a way where we never see your private keys. So when you sign these transactions, we're not the ones doing the signing. You are. You can see exactly what you're doing. You'll see a window that comes up that says, here's the input you want to spend, here's the inscription you want to spend, here's the amount of BTC you expect to get back, and basically all the outputs will be clear. And of course, as wallet UIs improve and as the ecosystem gets more mature, I think you'll see the quality of the infrastructure get a lot better as well. But I think that in principle, it's actually a much more elegant and much more safe system than what you see even on Ethereum, where if you go to OpenSea, the first thing it asks you to do when you list something for sale is you have to give it access to all of your tokens. So you'll say, like, I'll give you access to all of my Bored Apes, or I'll give you access to all of my Fidenzas, or something like that. Whereas with this marketplace on Bitcoin, all you're doing is committing to exactly what you want to see. I'm going to transfer, 1 inscription to the buyer, and the buyer will give me X amount of BTC back. And I think this allows for a great experience, both from a user experience perspective and from a trust and safety perspective as well.
Yeah, that is such an important point. I get really freaked out when that message pops up on OpenSea saying, you're giving OpenSea access to all of the NFTs by, this marketplace, this collector, and especially with the amount of scams and phishing that novice and, technically savvy collectors have faced. It's such a scary experience. So I think that's a really important point. You know, one thing, Jamil, that you mentioned, and I want both of your opinions on this, is this idea that people are or creators have been attracted to inscribing on Bitcoin because, for the first time they feel like, okay, this is going to give me the assurances, the guarantees that I kind of need for this piece of work to live on, and maybe they have an emotional connection to it, and plan to hold that piece of work or maintain it for themselves for the foreseeable future. Um, so with that in mind, how do you kind of foresee the collecting slash trading experience evolving on Bitcoin versus the more speculative nature of collecting and trading on within other ecosystems like Ethereum or Polygon or Solana?
Yeah, I think this is a really good call out. I think we've had this kind of long term view. As Jamil mentioned, we've been building in this space for about 18 months now, and I think what's kind of interesting is that even from like the collections and the individual one of one pieces and things like that have arisen in kind of this programmable Bitcoin ecosystem, it tends to be it tends to attract a kind of like longer term thinking individual. Like one kind of like fun tidbit here is I recall one of the larger projects. They're actually the largest project on the L2 that we started on Stacks. It's called Megapont. They had their Stacks collections, and then they wanted to kind of welcome some Ethereum community members to kind of try out Bitcoin secured NFTs, and so they launched an Ethereum collection, and all of the Ethereum people that found their way over were like shocked that only like 2% of them were listed on OpenSea. Like they were just like, this is unheard of. Like you normally see people just trying to flip these things like on day one, and I think that they kind of saw this like long term. There's actually like a community I want to be part of. There are events that I can attend, like Gamma sponsored a fun event actually of theirs at NFT NYC last year, and holders were able to attend. And there's like tons of other benefits and things of just like being there for the long haul. And of course this is still referring to even like a traditional Ethereum 10K style collection, but I think it just shows like a slight difference in culture, even like a year ago. But I think on L1 and through inscriptions, where you're not only kind of in this almost like longer term philosophical mindset of, okay, I'm like I'm not just here for some speculative reason. Like I'm here because I want to see some real value, and utility and all of those buzzwords that are often used. But I think actually now there is a true long term like inherent connection there at a blockchain level, and so I think this is going to breed a lot of new use cases and a lot of new types of creators that are willing to create in this way. And I think honestly, I know this wasn't your exact question, but I think it's kind of relevant here. I think it's our responsibility as a platform that believes in this future, and is building for the long term, not just building for the next 6 months of potentially a little bit more hype driven kind of initial run here, but really this long term view. And so in the product, we're focusing very deeply on how we can tailor the product experience to really align with this cultural shift, or not even shift. It's a culture that's always been here for Bitcoiners. You always hear like you got to hodl your Bitcoin. It's like this is just the mindset, and I think that ordinals and inscriptions are just another like manifestation of that.
Maybe to that point, talk a little bit about, with that culture in mind, how specifically has that translated to how you've designed the Gamma marketplace?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit to this, and Jamil probably has some thoughts here as well. But I think like for the current product that we have now, admittedly, we just need to get something out there for users that is functional, and that is safe. And so, I think to some degree, because we've been building at this for quite a while, we were able to kind of move a bit faster than others. But ultimately, the experience is safe, and I think it's a good experience. Like, it's a good user experience. It's a clean, like, easy to understand uh, interface and product. But I think there are things that really we still want to expand upon. So I think, for example, on our user profiles, we have things like a showcase where you can actually select specific things that you really feel especially connected to, and you want to kind of like have it represent not only something that you like, but you want it to almost be like your little like shelf that you keep in your in your living room or something like that, where it's kind of like a conversation piece, and so you can do things like that today on the product. But I think I won't share all of our secrets here, but I think we have some ideas of how we might kind of lean into the idea that what we're seeing created on Bitcoin is more special, perhaps more exclusive or
Mhm.
high end, kind of like different kinds of assets than you see in other ecosystems. And I think you could almost think of it as like what you would see traded on eBay versus what you would see auctioned by Sotheby's or Christie's or something. And it's just it's a completely different type of use case. By the way, though, I don't want to suggest we're trying to be gatekeepers or inaccessible. Like, I think we have something for everyone, even if you are just trying to get your feet wet. But I think there will be a subset of users that are interested in a more premium kind of experience on a product level, and we're gonna make sure that we have that.
In the end, we want to do we want to make sure of two things, right? Number one, that of course, whatever we put out as a product, we can personally feel proud of and satisfied with ourselves that we're proud of what we put out there. We feel good about it, both from a principled perspective and from a user experience perspective. We take the design and the work very seriously, and we want to make sure that what we put out there is um, makes us feel that we did right by our customers and right by our users. But I think more importantly, what we want to put out does right by creators and collectors as well. I think creators, especially when they look for a place to host their work, they really do want to feel respected, and they want to feel like where they put their work is deserving of their effort, of their artwork, of all the blood and sweat they put into making their work real. And I think we really do see that in creators, and often it's forgotten from the marketplace perspective. But we wouldn't be anything if it weren't for the creators. We wouldn't have anything to host. In fact, if you go to Gamma and you look at the homepage, almost everything is black and white. The marketplace UI sort of fades into the background, and what you see is the artwork, the images, the videos, the text that people are inscribing, and we really put that front and center. And I think that's what really drives and motivates us to put out a product that we feel is high standard, not only for ourselves, but because we know creators deserve a place where their work can be showcased in a way that they feel is respected, both from a principled perspective, in that we're doing things the right way, that we're preserving creator royalties, we're paying out creators their fair share, and we're displaying their work and taking care of their work and being a responsible sort of platform for where their work is showcased. And I think that in the end is what drives us. The marketplace is just a medium in between collectors, the community, and the creators who make it all happen.
This topic of creator royalties has been the subject of significant controversy and discussion in other ecosystems. I think the first question that naturally came up with ordinals is like, is it possible to implement and enforce creator royalties on Bitcoin? And, how exactly are you guys actually facilitating that?
So first of all, I want to start by saying we work from the principles, and then we figure out the best execution for it. And I think our principle here is that we want to make sure that whatever we do it while talking to creators, while working with them. And it's not a marketplace versus creator thing, right? As I said, the marketplace is here because of creators. We're here because these people are creating work and getting their work out there. So, of course, different circumstances call for different approaches. And actually, for this initial marketplace launch, our guiding principle at launch is basically we should not make more than creators on these secondary sales if they choose to opt in to a creator earnings share. So whatever commission we take, if a creator opts into their earnings, they'll take the same, right? And any creator right now can come up to us and say, here's our royalty address, and we'll make sure that that's taken care of. And I think this is especially also well suited to the market that Bitcoin is operating in. Right, we're talking more high-end work. We're talking more, less immediate trading volume second by second, but higher trading volume when it comes to prices and value of the work. And so I think this is much more conducive to a creator-friendly environment than a high-frequency trading, almost treating NFTs as sort of fungible tokens environment that you see in some areas of ETH.
This has long been kind of we've been quite outspoken about creator earnings. Basically since things first started heating up, where I forget which marketplace it was originally that kind of triggered some of this stuff. I think a lot of it stemmed from originally Solana ecosystem, which as Jamil said is kind of that high frequency style trading, and then kind of bled its way over into Ethereum. But I think one thing I really always like to call out, because I think this is maybe like a unique take, and it's just my personal opinion here, but I've heard a lot of people say the reason I don't like royalties is because there's no way to enforce them on chain in a way that they must be trustless and enforced by every platform. There's always going to be a way around it, and there's always going to be some platform that weasels their way out of it. And I think this is really kind of the wrong way to think about it, at least in my opinion. I think the reason why you want things in Web3, like, to really lean into this principle of being trustless, is not exclusively, but oftentimes due to like a power imbalance. And so if you have like a marketplace and a collector, the marketplace has a lot of power to abuse that collector. Or if you have, if you have a even an NFT project and a collector, likewise, there can be a lot of damage done there. And I don't want to suggest that there can't be damage done from marketplaces to creators, because obviously we've seen that. But I think like the way I look at it is that this is like a B2B relationship. Like this is a creator that is running a business, and this is a marketplace that is running a business. And the marketplace is beholden to the creator for its supply. Like the creator is the supply of the product on the marketplace, and so there's kind of like naturally aligned incentives there of, if I abuse this relationship, you're not going to list your work here in the future. Now, in Ethereum, for example, if you have a smart contract, it's very hard to like prevent that from being listed there in the future. But ultimately, I think creators will get more and more creative of like, I'm not going to support you. I'm going to speak out against you. I'm going to tell my creators not to. I'm sorry, my collectors not to use you. Like there's different means that a creator kind of has there. But again, going back to this like B2B business concept, like there's the blockchain is an amazing tool for so many use cases and areas. I don't think that this particular use case is one where it needs to be like at the forefront. Like these are businesses working together. You could even sign like a legal contract that says, I will uphold your royalties. And I don't think we need to get to there yet, but like I guess I'm just saying there's like creative ways to approach this. So anyway, I don't want to keep rambling on this topic, but of course, like it's one that we really care about, and I think the bottom line is, if you are a creator and you are using Gamma, you will always get your fair share. Like things may change in the future because of speaking with creators and speaking with collectors and finding that this mechanism doesn't work, or this does work. But ultimately, creators are always going to be part of the discussion, and Gamma will never make more than creators on a sale.
Not rambling at all. I'm really happy you kind of went into that. I think it's really important and a really key differentiator for sure. And I think, based on how you both have been describing the more long-term, maybe fundamental oriented collectors of NFTs on Bitcoin versus other networks, it maybe even seems like the interests of collectors and creators is more like naturally aligned to allow for the upholding of royalties, the fair share of royalties being paid out to collectors. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit and actually like get a sense of how you guys are thinking about the market opportunity. It's really early, but what types of creators and collectors have been showing interest in ordinals, both individuals and maybe more bigger entities that have either dropped collections and have communities on other chains and are now starting to show interest in doing more on with ordinals on Bitcoin.
It's been pretty incredible to see the outpouring of interest in Bitcoin and in ordinals from people outside the ecosystem, and from both outside crypto and from other blockchains. I got a DM from a prominent project from the founder of a prominent project on another blockchain, and he was like, in this was about a day after we launched our inscription service, so quite early on. And he was like, I've always low key been a Bitcoin, person, but I've never really felt comfortable coming into Bitcoin, because I didn't feel it was very accepting of projects, of creators, of the types of work that I've been doing on other blockchains. And I think you see a lot of this from people around the ecosystem. I think many people sort of paint ETH and Bitcoin or Solana and ETH and Bitcoin as a complete dichotomy of individuals. But actually, a lot of people on other chains started in Bitcoin. That's where they first fell in love with the principles of decentralization, of permissionless systems, and of crypto in general. And you start to see a lot of these people start to come back and look at Bitcoin and say, hey, there's actually something interesting going on here in a much bigger way than we've seen before when it comes to the digital asset space. And so I think it's attracting a lot of artists from basically all walks of work and all walks of life. So we've seen, of course, bigger brands like Yuga Labs come in and do a small, bespoke, high quality, high value collection on Bitcoin. We saw DeGods do the same, basically inscribing a small subset of their most prized, NFTs directly on Bitcoin. And you also see a bunch of independent one-of-one artists also come in and start inscribing their work. And I think the common theme is that you do see people treat this as a high quality, high store of value medium for their work. But you're seeing people from all walks of life, whether it's people coming from crypto or from outside. I think they're unified by the principles and the value that Ordinals and Bitcoin is offering right now.
Yeah, I think actually just to kind of tack on to the very last phrase you said there, like including even people from outside. I think this is, to your one question, Ria, on like market opportunity here. I think this is an area that that I think Bitcoin kind of is uniquely positioned to kind of offer a great on ramp kind of experience. Like, I'll caveat that to say, if you look up articles from the last 3 to 4 weeks, you may see that, oh my gosh, it's so challenging to actually get started on using inscriptions and ordinals. But I'd say give the builders a little bit of credit in that we had 10 years of more than that, but let's say 10 years of Bitcoin development and no real proper web wallet that can sign a Bitcoin transaction. And now in the last 5 weeks, I think we now have 3 or 4, if not more. So I think like the pace of innovation and the pace of improving the user experience is just absolutely astronomical. And likewise, we'll hope people feel the same about Gamma from a marketplace perspective. But I think I just want to like drill into this point here, though, because I think for those of us that are, kind of within the Web3 space, and I'll say more broadly, not the Bitcoin space, but even Ethereum and Solana and Tezos and any other number of chains that you might be, building on. I think it's easy to kind of put your blinders on and think like, wow, Ethereum is just this crazy dominant force, and something like OpenSea is just this behemoth, in terms of a platform and a user base. And it is pretty large. Like, I think OpenSea has something like 3 million users, maybe a little bit more than that. But I always like to draw this connection, to almost like a, even not just Web 2, but like a in between Web 2 and Web 3, you have something like Coinbase. And so while OpenSea has 3 million users, Coinbase has 110 million users. And so, it's OpenSea is just a fraction. It's like maybe 3% of the users that Coinbase has. And I always kind of I found this quite interesting. I had to re-download the Coinbase app. I had it on my phone and I deleted it, and I had to reinstall it. And I searched for it in the App Store, and it didn't say Coinbase, where you buy Ethereum. It says Coinbase, buy Bitcoin. Like that is the like first words that you can still see when you're searching for this app. And I think that it's really like an important call out to say, I think the normie world, they may have dabbled in kind of crypto and in Bitcoin. Maybe they haven't, but in terms of like brand recognition and something that people trust, I think Bitcoin is like stands apart from the rest. I bet you, if you ask the average person, almost everyone has heard of Bitcoin, if not owns some Bitcoin. I would bet that a very small percentage of people like know what Ethereum is or own Ethereum. And I think even from a user experience and user safety perspective, as Jamil was saying earlier, I think Bitcoin also has some unique value adds there. So having this kind of like post condition model where the trade must occur in this specific way, or it's not possible, versus an Ethereum model where I can click a link and I've just authorized every single one of my tokens to be drained from my wallet without realizing it. And so I also don't want to dismiss that you always should be careful, and there's of course risks of even a Bitcoin wallet, but I think the long story short here is that I do truly believe that this phrase that people like to say of onboarding the next billion users to Web3, I don't think that. I think Bitcoin has like really the greatest chance of doing that, and I know that sounds perhaps contrarian, but it also sounded contrarian when we said, "Hey, Bitcoin is more than just a store of value. It can be productive too." And I think that maybe there's it's worth thinking a little bit contrarian on this issue.
Bitcoin was definitely my, gateway drug into crypto, and Ordinals has definitely reignited my excitement about what is possible on Bitcoin. And Nick, to your point, I think, the brand recognition around Bitcoin is significant. I love that anecdote about you downloading the Coinbase app and seeing Bitcoin mentioned above everything else. So we're running out of time here, but I do want to maybe end the conversation with a more lighthearted question around what some of your favorite creations have been using Gamma, or maybe even not using Gamma, and kind of what are you most excited about in the next in the coming weeks as it relates to Gamma, but also just the opportunities created by Ordinals.
For me, my sort of some of my favorite inscriptions, and some of the favorite, I think my favorite aspect of ordinals and inscriptions have been that it sort of started out in a very, simple, organic way. And I think it almost harks back to like that, days of early computing or early Bitcoin or early hacker culture, where you just see an incredible amount of creativity come from very simple tools and very, very primitive, early starts. And so what you saw though was almost an explosion of creativity with the first inscriptions. You saw someone put like Doom as an inscription that you could actually play in the browser, inscribed on Bitcoin, or like an Apple emulator, or like interactive websites. The Sappy Seals project, inscribed these digital artifacts that you could that were like dynamic images written in HTML and in SVGs. So I really love that sort of creativity and that explosion of ideas that comes from starting from something very simple. It's actually quite ironic because you'd think that a more like powerful, more special purpose blockchain would afford these opportunities, when on some of those you just see copycat projects that are doing the same things. So I think we've sort of seen a lot of creativity in what people have used inscriptions and ordinals for. And that's really what I'm looking forward to in the future is, people using this for art, for projects, for even like software and code. I think it's easy to get lost in the day to day of trading when you're working in digital assets and NFTs. But I think it's important sometimes to take a step back and really realize that what we're doing here is building the future of digital assets on Bitcoin. This is, potentially a world-changing idea that you can build almost anything on top of. It doesn't have to be images, doesn't have to be text, doesn't even have to be digital assets. It can be real-world ones too. And so I think the possibilities really are endless. If that doesn't seem like too vague of an answer, but I really do genuinely believe it, and I'm very excited to see what people build. As a marketplace, we're really here to facilitate it, but it's really up to you, everybody, to basically build the future.
Yeah, I'll of course echo everything that Jamil just said, and I'd say, from my perspective, I'm also just really excited to see uh, kind of like the art community, especially, find such a great fit on Bitcoin because I think a lot of artists found their way to Web3. You know, because they're looking for ways to finally have a way to earn a sustainable living, doing what they love and doing what others can appreciate, and then being able to kind of lean into those connections and having that really like community driven experience that Web3 provides. And so seeing fine artists who are for the very first time feeling comfortable putting their like prized creations on the blockchain because they view it as living on into the future, like that's really promising. And also this is just like I'm personally a big art fan, and I'm a collect a lot of art based NFTs, across different chains. And I think, I'm very excited actually that we are going to be sponsoring and working with a curator at Bitcoin Miami 2023. And they have the first ever Ordinals art gallery. And it's going to be 21 individual artists that are featured, and this will be like a fine art exhibit within the art gallery, and these like curators will actually be pulling together like some of the most unique and culturally significant fine art pieces and cultural artifacts, and showcasing that. So I'm really excited that we're able to kind of provide those creator tools so that creators can just do what they love, and then hopefully also showcase some really unique cases of that. So if you happen to be in Miami in May, you should definitely stop by and check it out.
I'm really looking forward to seeing that. What is the best way for listeners to, stay on top of what's going on with Gamma, staying on top of learning more about the events that you guys are doing at the upcoming conference in Miami, as well as, learning more about how exactly these pieces are going to be curated? I'm definitely excited to learn more about that part of it.
Yeah, so we have the Twitter handle at Try Gamma, because we want you to try out Gamma, and so at Try Gamma is our Twitter, and that's where you can kind of keep up to date with things and link off to anything else. So our Discord is there if you want to join. Our newsletter, we publish a copy there weekly, and you can subscribe, and of course just gamma.io is our website, and that's where you can check out the platform and get started and create your first inscription, or by the time this podcast is released, buy your first inscription on the marketplace.
Amazing. And where can listeners find each of you individually?
Yeah, so that's my name at Nick Sainato, Sainato, and Jamil.
Yeah, and mine is Jamil, Jamil BTC on Twitter.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for coming on such short notice. I know you guys are probably running around trying to get everything squared up. Well, I guess you will have it squared up by the time this episode drops tomorrow, but very, very excited to have the Gamma Marketplace launching on Bitcoin and making it significantly easier to trade NFTs and ordinals on Bitcoin and creating a very special targeted experience for both collectors and